Max Verstappen has just been shaken by the most alarming evidence uncovered on day one in Qatar, and Red Bull now admits the RB21 is in a crisis unlike anything they expected this late in the championship. The data shows Verstappen finished only 6th in sprint qualifying, almost half a second away from Oscar Piastri, while being beaten by Yuki Tsunoda for the first time this season in pure pace. Engineers discovered that Verstappen is fighting uncontrollable bouncing, extreme balance shifts and possible floor damage from a wide moment in turn 4, leaving him without stability in the fastest sections of the circuit. Before we break down how this new evidence has thrown his weekend into chaos, make sure you subscribe right now, because what Red Bull uncovered in Qatar could change the championship outcome. The opening day in Qatar sent shockwaves through the Red Bull garage as internal analysis revealed that the RB21 has one of the narrowest operating windows of any top car this season. Verstappen ended sprint qualifying in 6th place, almost half a second behind Oscar Piastri and only 9 thousandths behind Yuki Tsunoda, who outqualified him for the first time this year. For a driver of Verstappen's precision, this result is more than an outlier. It is a sign that the chassis is failing to respond to his inputs at every critical phase of the lap. The most alarming issue comes from the severe bouncing that Verstappen described as the car bouncing like an idiot in fast corners and braking zones. Unlike aerodynamic porpoising, this was a mechanical suspension issue preventing the car from absorbing the aggressive curbs of Lusail. Each time the chassis struck a bump, the car lost stability and disrupted airflow beneath the floor. Verstappen could not hold the line through the long high-speed sections, and the bouncing prevented him from committing fully to the corner entries that usually define his advantage. Balance instability added a second layer of chaos. Verstappen reported intense understeer on corner entry that suddenly flipped into abrupt oversteer on exit. This unpredictable behavior destroys rhythm on a track that rewards confidence and smooth rotation. Red Bull's internal data confirms that Verstappen was fighting the car mid-corner in places where he normally trusts its precision completely. Every correction cost speed and reduced his ability to generate tire temperature consistently through the lap. The situation worsened during the second qualifying segment when Verstappen ran wide at turn 4 and struck the gravel. Engineers believe this moment likely caused damage to the floor, and the telemetry immediately showed aerodynamic instability. Because most of the RB21's downforce is generated by the floor, even small damage disrupts the airflow that keeps the chassis balanced. Under park firm rules, Red Bull cannot repair the damage before the sprint, leaving Verstappen with a compromised aerodynamic platform for the rest of the day. Free practice 1 had already revealed warning signs. Verstappen finished 6th, more than half a second behind the leader, and radioed repeatedly about strange steering behavior and a lack of responsiveness from the front end. The engineering team attempted changes to anti-roll bars and ride height, but none produced improvements. Christian Horner later admitted that nothing they tried worked, which indicates a deeper correlation failure between simulation expectations and the behavior of the car on this type of circuit. The championship context makes the situation even more critical. Verstappen is tied with Oscar Piastri at 366 points and trails Lando Norris by 24. With Piastri starting the sprint from pole and Norris from 3rd, Verstappen's 6th place start puts him in a position where any lost ground could reshape the final standings. Red Bull privately admits that the sprint will be a damage limitation exercise because the RB21 lacks the consistency to fight the McLarens over a full lap. Complicating matters further are the park firm regulations. Because this is a sprint weekend, Red Bull cannot make significant setup changes without triggering a pit lane start for Sunday. Engineers are now debating whether the condition of the floor and the instability of the platform justify sacrificing grid position to recover a balanced car for the Grand Prix. This is the clearest sign of how serious the situation has become, because the team must now choose between preserving short-term points or rebuilding a car that has fallen outside any controllable performance window. The fundamental problem for Max Verstappen in Qatar is that the RB21 never entered a stable aerodynamic window across any lap. The internal analysis confirms that the car could not generate predictable downforce in the long high-speed corners that define Lusail. Verstappen relies on a precise front end to commit early to rotation, but the RB21 responded sluggishly at corner entry and then abruptly lost balance when lateral load increased. This meant he had to approach every corner with caution rather than instinct, a clear indication that the car was not behaving in a way he could trust. A second critical problem emerged from the mechanical bouncing that destabilized the chassis every time Verstappen attacked curbs or surface imperfections. This was not aerodynamic porpoising but a mechanical stiffness issue within the suspension that prevented the car from absorbing vertical forces. Each oscillation disrupted the airflow beneath the floor and removed stability at corner entry. Verstappen described the car as bouncing like an idiot, and the internal data supports the severity of the issue. With every bounce he lost the ability to position the car accurately, a devastating limitation on a track where precision determines lap time. The balance inconsistency further deepened the crisis. Verstappen reported that the RB21 carried stubborn understeer when he turned the wheel, only to suddenly snap into oversteer when he applied throttle. This unstable transition from one extreme to another forces hesitation at the moment drivers usually commit to the line. Red Bull's analysis shows that these swings were not minor but large enough to force Verstappen to alter his rotation technique, which breaks the natural flow needed to generate momentum through long corners. This lack of balance coherence is one of the most damaging traits a modern Formula One car can display. The suspected floor damage created a fourth major issue that amplified every weakness in the car. During the second qualifying segment, Verstappen ran wide at turn 4 and touched the gravel. The telemetry recorded an immediate aerodynamic disturbance in the following corners, suggesting the impact may have compromised a vortex-generating surface or structural edge of the floor. Because the floor produces the majority of the car's downforce, even a small disruption drastically affects stability. With park firm rules preventing repairs, Verstappen had no choice but to continue with an aerodynamic platform that was no longer delivering symmetric load. Another key problem was the RB21's inability to generate consistent temperature in the front tires. Verstappen struggled to maintain energy through the long corners, which forced the tires below their ideal working range. When the front axle falls out of temperature, the steering response becomes heavy and delayed, preventing the driver from committing to the desired line. Verstappen attempted earlier rotation inputs, but the inconsistent front grip made this approach ineffective. This mismatch between tire demand and chassis behavior reinforced the understeer and prevented the car from settling into a rhythm. The failure of setup adjustments intensified the overall problem. Red Bull attempted changes to the anti-roll bars, ride height, and mechanical balance across free practice, but none produced meaningful improvements. The internal report highlights that the car reacted weakly or not at all to these adjustments, which indicates a deeper correlation issue between simulator expectations and real track behavior. When a car reaches a point where setup tools have no effect, the driver is forced to drive around the problems rather than work with the engineering team to solve them. This left Verstappen constrained by a platform that could not be tuned into competitiveness. The final issue affecting Verstappen is the psychological strain created by this instability. Verstappen is a driver who thrives on confidence, aggression, and precision, yet the RB21 denied him all three. Entering a championship-critical weekend tied with Oscar Piastri and chasing Lando Norris, Verstappen needed a car he could rely on. Instead, he was forced into a survival mindset from the first minutes of practice. When a driver begins a session knowing the car cannot respond to instinct, the competitive edge is blunted. This shift in mindset is one of the clearest signs that Red Bull is facing a deeper crisis than the results alone suggest. Red Bull's engineering department entered Qatar under the heaviest pressure they have faced all season because the RB21 behaved in ways that contradicted every simulation model used to prepare for the weekend. The internal review makes clear that the car delivered drastically different reactions on track compared to what the factory tools predicted. Engineers expected a stable aerodynamic platform at Lusail thanks to the RB21's historic strength and high-speed corners, but the reality was a chassis that shifted balance unpredictably with even minor steering inputs. This forced the team into crisis response mode from the earliest laps of free practice. One of the most critical engineering challenges came from the mechanical bouncing that Verstappen struggled with throughout the day. This was not the aerodynamic porpoising seen in earlier seasons but a suspension issue that prevented the chassis from absorbing curb strikes and micro bumps. When the suspension cannot stabilize vertical load, airflow beneath the floor becomes chaotic, destroying aerodynamic consistency. Red Bull attempted to soften the mechanical platform, but the bouncing persisted and created growing concern about fatigue stress on the rear structure. This left engineers with a problem they could not fully address without violating park firm conditions. Another major pressure point was the suspected floor damage Verstappen suffered in his off-track moment at turn 4. After running wide and touching the gravel, the telemetry showed immediate aerodynamic instability. Engineers believe a vortex generating section or an outer edge of the floor may have been compromised. The floor is the most sensitive aerodynamic component on a ground effect car, and even slight damage alters downforce distribution. Because the team cannot replace structural parts under park firm rules, they were forced to continue operating with a potentially weakened aerodynamic foundation. This is one of the most restrictive situations a modern Formula One team can face during a sprint weekend. The steering inconsistencies reported by Verstappen triggered another intensive engineering investigation. Throughout free practice he experienced sudden changes in steering weight at high speed, which suggested unstable aerodynamic load across the front wing and suspension. Red Bull adjusted anti-roll bars and attempted mechanical tweaks to restore predictability, yet the car ignored every change. When a car shows no response to setup tools, it indicates a structural mismatch between aerodynamic forces and mechanical compliance. This forced engineers to accept that the steering issue could not be solved within the session, leaving Verstappen with a front end he could not read or trust. Tire behavior also applied severe pressure to the engineering group. The RB21 failed to maintain a consistent temperature profile across both axles. Engineers observed that the rear tires overheated while the front tires remained below the optimal working range during the longest corners. This mismatch prevented the chassis from settling into a stable balance. Any attempt to correct one end of the car worsened the other, creating a loop of conflicting adjustments. With strict park firm restrictions, the team had almost no flexibility to explore alternative tire-related solutions. This trapped the engineers in a narrow operating window with no realistic escape. Another deep concern emerged from the widening gap between simulation tools and real-world behavior. Red Bull's predictive models suggested the RB21 would excel at Qatar due to its efficient aerodynamic platform and strong high-speed rotation stability. Instead, the car reacted with instability that the model did not foresee. This misalignment pressures the engineering department because it calls into question the accuracy of the tools used for car development. A breakdown in correlation is not a small issue but a signal that the underlying design may possess sensitivities that only extreme circuits like Lusail reveal. Such a discovery forces long-term strategic reconsiderations. The final engineering pressure point comes from the strategic dilemma posed by park firm. If Red Bull opens the car to repair suspected damage or pursue deeper adjustments, Verstappen will be forced to start the Grand Prix from the pit lane. If they keep the car closed, he must drive both the sprint and the main race with instability that could cost crucial championship points. Engineers must now advise whether to sacrifice grid position for Sunday or accept a compromised aerodynamic platform. This decision captures the magnitude of the challenge because neither option ensures recovery. It reflects the exact moment when engineering pressure becomes championship pressure.